You can save every day by shopping at Whole Foods Market. Seriously. Don't just go for the big sales. Walk the store and see the savings for yourself. In the seafood department, look for the yellow low price sign on Whole Foods Market Responsibly Farmed salmon. This fish is perfect for the grill. Buttery, fatty, yet lean, nice thick fillets. I'm getting hungry just thinking about it, and I know I can get it at a great price. There's so many ways to save at Whole Foods Market. Now you know.
Have you ever brought your magic to Walt Disney World like, hey, we came to play? Did you tip your tiara to a Creole princess or get goofy officially? Step up like a boss and save the day? Or see what life's like under the tree of life? Did you? If you could. Would you? When we come through, it's true magic. 'Cause we came to play. Bring the magic at Walt Disney World Resort.
What if you are the number 2 player in the world in whatever sport or activity, whatever it is you love doing? You're number 2. There's number 1 and you're number 2. Let's say hundreds of millions of people play your sport or game or activity. And out of all those hundreds of millions, you're the second best in the world. And then suddenly you bit by bit drop, you go down to the top 10. Now you're no longer in the top. You go below the top 20. And so you figure, okay, it's over. I got a little too old. Something happened. New people arrived. I'm no longer in the top 20. My career as the best or potentially the best is over. And this is what happened to Hikaru Nakamura. He was the number 2 player in the world in chess in, I think it was 2015. And Magnus Carlsen was number 1. And Hikaru couldn't quite break through to number 1. And then bit by bit, after this, almost 20-year career, he starts to drop. He falls below the top 20. And he says, you know what? I'm going to start, the pandemic happened. He started streaming. He started making YouTube videos. But mostly every day he was playing chess online and streaming it, meaning he was doing it live. And he would talk about chess and answer questions. And he suddenly built up an audience in the millions. Like tons of people, millions of people follow this guy. And they love him as an entertainer and as a chess player. And it's so amazing to have such a quality chess player do this live streaming every single day. And he explains how to be great at streaming. But an interesting thing happened is that a few years after he started doing this, he started playing in tournaments again for the first time in years. And he bit by bit started climbing up until last week. I was in Norway. He was playing in Norway chess along with the number 1 player in the world, Magnus Carlsen, and several others who are top in the world. And Hikaru, for the first time since 2015, became number 2 in the world again. And one thing I've always wondered watching his career these past few years is, did he become strong again? Because, as he would put it, he no longer cared. He no longer had the sole stress of, can I be the best in the world of chess? He had diversified the successful outcomes in his life. It could either be chess, or it could be streaming, or it could be investing, or it could be, other business ventures he's pursuing. We talk about all of this, how he became a top-notch streamer, how he became number 2 in the world, and then again, number 2 in the world. Is it really related to this feeling of I don't care? Well, this was a dream come true discussion for me. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. If you do, please share with your friends, subscribe, show it to all your chess playing buddies. And we don't get into the weeds about chess, so this was valuable for anybody who just wants to succeed in life. So here's Hikaru Nakamura.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show.
So I just wanted to start really with a question kind of in the weeds, but your game in Norway chess against Fabiano Caruana. By the way, you were both vying for number 2 and number 3 in the world, number 1 and number 2 in America. But he unleashed this novelty, like a move that's never been played. And I was sitting in the audience And I kept wondering, like, isn't Hikaru just winning here? Like, why didn't you just win a rook right there or an exchange right there? And you didn't. And for the life of me, I could not figure it out. I didn't have any computer around me or anything. And I was just trying to figure it out. How did he even find a novelty like that? And then why did you just assume, okay, I'm not going to go into this mess?
Yeah, so that would have been, I believe, the sixth round of Norway chess where I played Fabiano Caruana, my compatriot from the United States. And this was a critical game where we were blitzing out our moves, making all these moves very quickly. And then at a key point, Fabiano played a move that looks like a blunder over the board. And when that happens, when both players are moving very quickly and someone doesn't stop and slow down, it actually becomes very mental where you figure out whether someone is prepared or whether they've made a mistake. Because
should he have faked it a little bit, like instead of moving so quickly, or did he want to put fear in you?
Yeah, it's very tough to judge, but the time control playing, we have a timer for the whole game. There's no increment, meaning you get no added time. So if you get low on time, you run out of time, you will lose the game. And in general, if you waste a couple of minutes just sitting there thinking, more often than not, it doesn't really help you. It doesn't give you an advantage. And usually I would say that the top players can sense it when you're trying to bluff them. So usually you just go as fast as you can because you assume that you're going to need that time later on in the game versus trying to bluff them out, especially when you're talking 3-4 minutes in a game that goes about, or not a game, sorry, but when you have about 2 hours for the whole game, you're probably gonna have like four or five decisions where you spend 10, 15 minutes maybe, and already you're using a lot of your time. So you don't really try to bluff that often. In Fabiano's case, he moved very quickly. And when this happens, one of the things that you never, or one of the truths about chess is that the computer programs are better than humans. So if I go and play against a computer program like Stockfish, which is the best in the world, I will lose every single game, no matter what I do.
Could you draw a game?
Probably not.
Now, 100 games, and if you're just trying to draw.
I would say if I'm lucky, I can draw one, but I don't think that I can draw even a single game because when you're playing the computer program, there are a lot of things that go into it. But first of all, we're humans, so we're emotional. And when you go in, and you've heard me just say this where I say I'll lose every game. When you go in knowing that you're that much worse than the computer program, you already are that much worse, but then psychologically you even know it too. And computer programs don't have this issue at all. They just simply play the best
They don't care.
move.
They literally don't care,
yes,
as you often say. And I'm going to ask you about that later, but that's interesting.
And so when you're playing a game and somebody's moving very quickly, you feel like you're playing against a computer program, and that's what you don't want. So when we got to this critical moment, I was actually doing quite well in the tournament, and with so many rounds yet to be played, I figured it made more sense to be safe and play something where the game would trend towards a draw rather than try to be crazy and go for an all-out where I would win or I would lose. If that were the last round of the tournament, I might have made a different decision. But at that moment, it felt like the right decision. And also, as far as computers go, chess has changed a lot over the years. Computer programs have become very strong, but also there's a difference between the computer program that you use on your laptop versus, say, having a desktop or one of these computers that has a bunch of cores that's sitting at your house, or, for example, in the cloud. Either way, like it's very, very different. And a lot of these deep ideas you won't be able to find with the weaker computers. You really do need, supercomputer is the wrong word for techies out there because it's not the right word, but still you need a strong computer with many cores.
I looked at it later on the computer because, again, being in the audience directly watching, you're not allowed to have even your phone on. There's no commentary. It's actually an interesting experience because I never do it. I just try to put myself actually in the minds of the players as opposed to sitting there with commentary going, computer going. But later I looked at it on the computer and the computer didn't like it, his move. But of course, he explained on one of the streams that bigger computers liked it, like later on, like you had to have the computer on for a while, even with a stronger computer. So that's why I was wondering, like, how did he even know to pick that position to go deeper and beyond? The computer would probably told him it's not good until he sat there overnight with it.
Yeah, saying overnight is an exaggeration. The old days, this was true. So when I look at myself, one of the things that I don't necessarily want to call myself a pioneer, but I'm one of the first top players who actually started working with someone who basically works a lot of computer programs. They've written articles and all these different things, and they're not necessarily the strongest chess player out there. Now, if we go back in time, a lot of chess players in the old days, you would work with the absolute best players who were around you because computers didn't exist. But even in the early days of computers, it still was believed that humans, like having grandmasters or other very strong players around you, was more important than anything else. But I actually started working with someone whose, I would say, their expertise is essentially in understanding computer programs. and how you can use them to be better at chess. And so some of these ideas about leaving computer online, or not online, leaving computer on overnight, actually, I saw them very early on, like in 2009 or 2010. But nowadays, pretty much everybody does this. But also the time it takes to compute. This is why you want to be using computers with more processing power. Is basically because it doesn't even take you overnight. It might take 1 hour. It might take 30 minutes. But the more processing power you have, the quicker you're going to get to the solution. So if you have a strong enough computer, and there is I should say, a Russian player specifically who was using one of these state computers, I think at Lomonosov University, with something like 1 million cores. And this is something that would cost well into the millions of dollars for any top chess player to have access to. Fortunately for this Russian player, they do have access, or they have had access. And if you have a computer with that much power, it's going to come to that solution much quicker, maybe a couple of minutes versus half hour versus an hour versus, a whole day. So it has changed a lot, but knowing where to look, I think that's up to the people who you're working with, the team you have around you, and their ability to kind of sense where these things could exist.
I wonder if software could be written that looks for situations where the computer is unhappy, even searching 30 moves deep, but then they find that the evaluation changes drastically from moves 30 to 31 deep.
Yeah, well, now now we are starting to get into the weeds of a different topic, which is, I think that one of the things that's so fascinating, or you could say annoying, actually, if you're playing chess professionally, is that all these computer programs, they're, as I understand it, of course, I'm not an expert in computer science, but they are essentially creating their own systems or values for like pieces or center, like pawns in the center, the pawn structure, whether a piece is on the edge, whether it's in the center, wherever it is. My understanding is that these computer programs are now creating these algorithms on their own without human oversight. They create it. And so I think there's probably some way that you could do that, but ultimately, the reason I don't think this happens is because chess is a game or a sport, which it's not as mainstream, and because it's not super mainstream, there isn't necessarily money in it, and so the motivations, I think, aren't there for a lot of people. And this isn't the only area of chess where I think there could be big improvements, but because it's not like mainstream the way that a lot of sports are, it's not something that I think is explored that much.
Well, I want to get back to, something you were mentioning earlier about, and this is chess as a sport and your dedication to chess. And by the way, for anyone listening, you did a really great podcast with Lex Friedman about, your growth in chess, your history in chess, and people should listen to that. I want to talk to you about a variety of things. But you mentioned that, and I've noticed this as well, essentially you hit your peak in rating. I believe it was in 2017. You got to 2812 in rating.
2015, but
okay,
who's counting? Yes.
Yeah, 2812. And then you were mentioning from 2016 to basically early 2020, I think you went from like 2814 to 2736, something like that. Mm-hmm. And then then the pandemic happened. You started streaming. You became excellent in the streamer, which again, we'll talk about the skills required to that. But one thing that I noticed, and everybody, like, let's say in the chess world noticed, is that you went back to being like a great chess player, even though from all outward appearances, you were just on streaming all day. And so everybody wonders, and I know everybody wonders because people asked me about this, but do you think that the diversification of your interests and passions and successes somehow relieved the pressure, or what was the story then?
Yeah, so as far as chess goes, there are a couple of things. Chess is very different depending where you grow up in the world. Obviously, you have many different forms of governments, and the systems as a whole are quite different. But I would say for myself, because I grew up in the U.S., it's unfortunately not a country where I think chess is valued very highly. And what I mean by that is that I didn't really have a lot of support. So from the time I started out, pretty much until I was an adult, most of the money or the support that I had was from my parents. It was not from, say, the Chess Federation or like a local state government or anything of that sort. It was essentially my parents supporting me. And what I think that does is I think it's one of those things where, I feel like a lot of kids, they sort of hate their parents from like the age of like 13 to 18. And then suddenly once you're out in the real world, you actually respect your parents a lot more because you realize all the things they did for you so that you could be successful and everything else. And so for myself, once I was like 18, 19, I had to start trying to make a living from chess. And I think once you do something like chess where it's pure fun and you don't have to worry about anything, and then suddenly the real world hits you where you have to make a living, you have to try and survive, your whole perspective shifts. And for me, as I was improving, there are a couple stages. The first stage is you're playing casually. Once you get to Grandmaster, you start having aspirations of maybe playing professionally.
By the way, you were the youngest Grandmaster in the world when you became Grandmaster.
American. not world, but still, but so like they're saying, once you get to grandmaster, you start to aspire maybe to something more. But beyond that, in order to actually make a living, and when I mean a living, I'm just going to say like $100,000 versus say making 30,000. By 30,000, I mean it's scraping by. I don't mean it's like guaranteed. It's scraping by to make that money. I mean, of course, we're talking good 15 years ago now versus the modern day. But you're talking about like 30,000 versus say 100,000. It's like you can be a grandmaster, but you have to get to this 2,700 rating level, which is effectively about the top 15 to 20 in the world to make a good living. So there are all these different stages, and once you get there, you have to maintain it. So it's not like you get there and then you're set for life. If you have a bad series of tournaments, you could fall right back down, and your income could basically be decreased by 50 to 60%. So a lot of what was in my mind once I made it past this 2,700 level and I got to about the top 20 in the world is like trying to stay at that level. And what I mean by that is like you don't take as many risks. You try to win a game here or there. You try to draw a game here or there. I mean, the risks that you take are much smaller in general. But what that also does is it takes away from your pure ability to enjoy the game because you're not actually making the optimal decisions at the end of the day. And this, I mean, when we talk about optimization and making certain decisions, like this is why if chess were bigger, I think you would see a lot of data analytics about like, when you should take risks, how you should play certain games, which doesn't exist currently. But obviously I digress. So it's like once you break in, then you get there. And if you're able to stabilize in that level of the top 20 of the world, then the next goal is to try and get to the world championship match, where if you get there, you can maybe earn $1 million or more if you win the match. So there are all these little stages. But what I would say is that once you break into this top level, top 20, you get to travel to a lot of places like London, Paris, fancy tournaments. After a couple of years, it gets very boring. And then you're really looking at what's the next stage. And the next stage is to get to what's called the Candidates Tournament, which features the top 8 players in the world, roughly. And the winner of that tournament plays the world champion in a match. And you're guaranteed effectively $1 million, which is a huge jump versus trying to make like $100,000, $150,000, $200,000. It's a huge difference, and it can definitely change your life. So for me, I think I felt a lot of this pressure all the way through. But I think in 2016, one of the big things that changed is that I did qualify for the Candidates Tournament. And I qualified for this tournament, and I did very poorly there. Now, I would say one of the reasons I did poorly is that I simply felt too much pressure because the jump or the differential between being a solid top 10 player and then playing a world championship is just miles apart. And if you get there, of course, you're going to get fame. You're going to do very well. You'll probably have sponsors. Life is going to change in a way that you really can't imagine happening in chess. There's no other way for that to happen. So I played the tournament. I did very poorly. But besides doing very poorly in the tournament from all the pressure and these delusions of grandeur was that I realized that the tournament ultimately, to some degree, is about luck. And what I mean by that is that I don't feel like the best player always wins that tournament. Usually there's little luck. And what I would say is I'll compare it to tennis, for example, because the French Open recently happened. And I know that Zverev won the match against Nadal in the first round, but I would say it's akin to, say, playing the French Open and somebody has to play Nadal in the first round, or you have to play Nadal in the fourth round versus playing him in the finals. Like, things like this can happen where the pairings of who you play in such a long tournament, because it's 14 rounds, if you play someone who's doing poorly early in the tournament versus playing with them at the very end, there's a huge difference. Someone actually is probably going to get that lucky pairing where they're playing someone who's doing poorly towards the end of the event. So for me, once I played that Canada's tournament, I realized there's also a component of luck built into it. It really soured me because then I'm thinking about it and it's like, okay, if I play this Canada's tournament, even getting there is very hard, but winning the tournament is on some level luck. And then besides that, if I do actually win that, I'm going to play Magnus Carlsen, who's the best player in the world, and most likely I'm going to lose. And so after this event, I would say that my mindset became very negative, and I started really trying hard simply to maintain my level, which took away from the joy of chess.
And what does it mean when your mindset became negative? Like, that almost sounds like a little technical. Like, what?
Sure.
What would happen to you? Like, what would you think about?
So what I would think about is stay in the top 10 of the world. And what that means is that if you play, let's just say you play an individual tournament, you might play 9 games against 9 different opponents. And it might mean that in like 7 of the games, I try to play very boring games and make the draw so that I don't gain or lose a lot of ranking points. And then 1 or 2 games, I try to go crazy, get that win. Mm-hmm. And those extra few ranking points maybe put me in the top 5 in the world or something like this. But that's not really how you should be approaching the game. That's not the mindset you should have. But again, everybody is different, and depending where you grow up in the world, it can be different. What I'm saying here about worrying about my livelihood and all these things is something that does not apply to, say, Magnus Carlsen, who grew up in Norway, which has, I mean, we don't need to get into systems, but I would say like things like healthcare, for example, or government support. These are not things that you have to worry about in certain places in the world in the way that you do in the U.S. So,
I'm assuming you grew up like in or around New York City, right?
I grew up in Westchester County.
So very high cost of living. And it's hard to live in New York. Like everybody in New York is worried,
Yes.
basically.
Yes.
And so you kind of grew up in an environment where it's kill or be killed. It's eat or be eaten.
Right.
And plus there's a big New York chess cultural.
Also, to be fair, also with chess, like there is no, I mean, it's a career that I would say is relatively very short. Even though people think of it as being mental, it's very hard to maintain your level past about the age of 40. So you're looking at a relatively short career. And then afterwards, there are no benefits. There's no like pension plan. There are none of these things. They don't exist in chess.
You don't become an ESPN commentator, at least back
right,
then.
Exactly. So like you're really looking at a very short career, and that's why I would say that after I played this candidates tournament, I thought that that I realized there was some luck to even get to the match. It became a situation where all I care about is like winning a game here or there, keeping my level where it's at, and then you don't enjoy the game. You start to hate the game. It becomes this job, and also like. A lot of people think traveling is fun, and I think the first couple of years when I broke in, it was a lot of fun. But when you're going to the same places over and over and over again, that also doesn't help because it's the same people, it's the same places, and for me, I think that's what really led to this downturn. Is that it was all about trying really hard not to lose ranking points or ranking spots in the world, as opposed to trying to actually play good chess. And when you care more about that than actually the enjoyment and trying to do your best, trying to perform, then I think you're definitely going to experience some failure.
And let's break that down a little bit. Like when you started going professional, and then it seems like it just took you a few years, and suddenly you were number 2 in the world with Magnus Carlsen being number 1. So the difference between number 1 and number 2, at least in terms of career, as you're pointing out, is huge. Like there's a big difference between the kind of income you can make when you're Magnus Carlsen, as opposed to, a lot of people were thinking and are still thinking, you could be number 1. But I feel like you almost don't want to think that. And maybe you did think that at one point. And
I mean, I think the thing is like, I like to think, for me, I would love one day to actually be able to talk to like some of these guys in tennis, because I like the same situation where like, I'm a competitor. I want to be the best in the world. But I also know that I live in a time where you have someone who's just so unique. It'd be like, I've said this on my stream, I think, but it's like Andy Roddick. I think if not for Roger Federer, he probably would have won 4 or 5 Grand Slams at least. I mean, probably not in the double digits, but he would have won more Grand Slams. But there was this guy, Roger Federer, who unfortunately was like, now of course there's Nadal and Djokovic, but like literally like the greatest player ever. And you're unfortunate to be in the same time as someone like that. And so for me, I mean, early on, I would say like the early 2010s around, I had some of these aspirations. But Magnus, of course, he started winning every tournament. He, of course, beat me. He became the world champion. And at some point, you want to believe you can compete against someone like this, but you also know that in reality, it's very, very difficult. It's definitely an uphill struggle. So you also have to deal with reality. So like, that's the other problem is I think if I had that component where I thought that I could be the absolute best in the world, maybe my career could have been different. But after a couple of years, it was very clear there's this one guy who's just better than everyone else. And that also hurts the motivation.
And do you think a lot of people in the top 20, and again, we're talking, let's say in the world, there's 600 million people who play chess. Right now, of those 600 million, you're number 2. There's Magnus Carlsen and then Hikaru. And do you think a lot of the people in the top 20 have kind of become dejected with Magnus there because it's like this wall they keep hitting?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there definitely is some of the players from the older generation now. To be clear, chess is changing. There are kids who are becoming very strong who are now the top 10. But definitely when you look at the players, I would say there are some American players, there's a Russian player. It's this wall. Your goal ultimately, I think, and no one's going to admit this because we're all competitors, but your goal is just to get to the world championship. That's the goal. And then you expect to lose to Magnus, which, I mean, to be fair, I think when you expect to lose to someone or you automatically say they're better than you, more often than not, you're going to lose some because it's in your head as well. Chess is very psychological.
Yeah, like let's say 2 people have equal skill and you have this mindset that, this guy's better than me. What's the percentage mindset plays a role in an individual game?
Huge role. I mean, actually, I don't know if I've said this, but a lot of tournaments I would say between like 2017 and 2019, Magnus was playing in the same events I was, and my goal was just to make a draw against them and try to beat other people in the tournament. My goal was to make a draw. It was not to try and beat him or take risks on any of these things. It was to make a draw and then try to beat the other players in the tournament. And I think a lot of players are like this in general, and you do. Unfortunately, I mean, it's hard to explain because it's not like a sport, but since I played tennis and it's what I follow the most, it's just one of those things where Magnus in the critical moments, he finds a way to get it done. He finds a way to win the critical games always. And that's what great champions do. And when you see that more and more and more over like a decade and a half, it gets in your mind, and you think this person's unbeatable. You really do start to believe that.
Take a quick break. If you like this episode, I'd really, really appreciate it. It would mean so much to me. Please share it with your friends and subscribe to the podcast. Email me at altucher@gmail.com and tell me why you subscribed. Thanks. Oh my gosh, this is my favorite sponsor because, as some of you might know, I lived for about 3 years in just Airbnbs. I didn't want to own. I didn't even want to rent. So I just started staying in Airbnbs. And yet I didn't have to deal with any kind of maintenance. I didn't have to deal with anything really. I had like plates, towels, furniture, TVs, cable TV. I didn't have to deal with any of all the stuff that people have to deal with when they start renting. So I loved staying in Airbnbs. I did it for about 3 years, or almost about 3 years. Whenever I stay in an Airbnb, I think this is such a great idea for people who own a home. Whenever they travel, you can make money while you're not using your place. Your home might be worth more than you think. Find out how much at airbnb.com/host. There is just so much more personal information on the internet about me, you, all of us than we could possibly realize. And it's not just like the dark web where maybe your email address, you're on some massive email marketing list. So I am so glad I found a site like Delete Me that actually removes your name and information from hundreds, maybe even thousands of websites. You got to check it out. You go to deleteme.com. But first, Delete Me finds and removes any personal information you know online and makes sure that it stays off once you sign up for them. Delete Me is a subscription service, removes your personal info from the largest people search databases on the web, and in the process helps prevent or identify potential ID theft, doxing, phishing scams. So sign up and provide Delete Me with exactly what information you want deleted, and their experts take it from there. Trust me, you will find tons of stuff. Data brokers hate Delete Me. When you sign up, Delete Me immediately goes to work scrubbing all your personal information from data broker platforms. Your personal profile is no longer theirs to sell. So take control of your data and keep your private life private by signing up for Delete Me. Now at a special discount for listeners of the James Altucher Show, today get 20% off your Delete Me plan by texting James to 64000. Text James to 64000. The only way to get 20% off is to text James to 64000. I'll say it one more time. That's James. Text it to 64000. Message and data rates may apply. See terms for details. If Magnus didn't exist, you might be the Roger Federer of chess. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, I look at your games and I say that, you get it done. Particularly like when I watch you stream, I don't know how you save yourself out of some of these positions against like some of the best players in history. You're getting it done.
Yeah, so I mean that's where like we can talk about sort of where I branched out. So, I would say like around 2019, things started going really poorly because I fell from about number 7 or 8 in the world all the way down to number 20. And I was basically in this danger zone where I might not get invitations to top level tournaments and my income could essentially dry up overnight. Now, it wouldn't disappear completely, but it would go down significantly. I would say 50% or more. And that's kind of when, at the end of 2019, I made this very conscious decision that I was going to take a long break from chess. Normally there's certain periods, certain months when you always play tournaments. So between like 2010 and 2019, I always played a tournament in January. And I decided at the end of 2019, I was going to take about a 6-month break and come back in April of 2020 to play the United States Chess Championship. And I was just going to get this break, refresh, reset myself completely, and then start going back into it.
Did you play at all during this break or?
No. So what happened is I took this break and I was actually, I streamed a little bit in I would say December and January. I was doing some live streaming in 2019 already. And then in February, I made this decision to go to Hawaii to take a 2-week vacation. As soon as I was going to come back from that vacation was when I was going to get serious, start studying chess every day, and get ready for the US Championship in April. And I went to Hawaii, and I think it might have been the first night or the second night that I was there. And I think it was like I woke up really early because I wanted to go hiking. That's another one of my great passions. And I looked at my phone. I think I looked at the Yahoo Finance app or one of those apps, and I saw markets down like 3 or 4%. And of course, that's because I think there was a case in Italy or something of COVID, and that really started the shift. And so I got out of Hawaii just before the lockdowns began. I went back to Florida where I live, and I was stuck at home. So what to do? Now you don't know if the U.S. Championship is going to happen. What am I supposed to do? So I was very lucky because I had already started streaming in 2019, so I was able to jump right into streaming with nothing else to do, and that made a world of difference. But I guess that's probably a separate topic. So what I would say, getting back to the chess, is because of what happened with the pandemic, because sort of my whole revenue stream changed and sort of the way that I went about my life changed as a whole. When I came back to chess in 2022, I did not play with any of these fears. So you can say it's a good thing or a bad thing with something like chess, that, the financial situation is the way it is, where you only have maybe 10 to 15 players in the world who make a living. For me, I was able to find another avenue to make a living. And because of that, when you play chess terms without any of these fears, I think I basically freed my mind, to use a Matrix term, where I basically freed my mind, where when I played terms from then to now, the only goal that I set for myself is to be competitive. As long as I'm not losing every single game, that's my only goal. And I'd also say, getting back to the point that I made about Magnus, how I would play for a draw, I don't even think that way when I play Magnus anymore. I just go and I try to enjoy playing against him. I don't worry about winning the game or losing the game. I just want to show that I can compete with these players. And so it's a complete mind shift. And I think if not for that, I don't know where I would be right now in chess. But because I've been able to just play the game purely for the love and the enjoyment of it, and trying to have the best time that I can, and perform the best that I can, really, it's just, I'm playing better now almost than I ever was in my career.
I know it's really, I don't know maybe of another instance where someone went from being number 2 in the world to dropping out of the top 20 and falling in rating as you did. And then you went into a completely different career, the streaming. And again, it really seems like, because you, like you said, you freed your mind from the anxieties of chess and money. You diversified your income streams very well. It sort of freed your play somehow. Like, can you think of another chess player where in history that maybe had a bounce back like that?
From there all the way to the top, I can't actually think about anyone, especially because I'm getting older. I'm not, if I did this when I was between 20 and 25, that's one thing. But the pandemic hit in 2021. I was already 33, 34. So I'm already towards that 40 mark, which of course is close to retirement. So no, I can't think of anyone who did it. I also think, honestly though, one of the reasons I think Magnus dominates as much as he does, because I think a lot of players of the older generation, they do have this mindset. Maybe it's not the fears, but it's about making sure they maintain their world ranking, as opposed to trying to win tournaments and play their absolute best shots. Because ultimately, you have to pay the bills and you have to make a living. And so I think a lot of top players from my generation, they struggle with this because they're not actually playing chess for the right reason.
Yeah, there was one interview I saw with Magnus yesterday where he was going through his calculations while he was just trying to decide what to do in his last game, and he was looking at your game, and he made the calculation, okay, no matter what. Oh no, this was the calculations he made after losing, I guess, the third game to Prague. Okay, if he does this for the rest of the tournament, he'll maintain his number 1 status. So like, these are the things he's thinking of. It's very important for him, that number 1 status in the world. Like, he's kept it for so long, he wants to still keep it. Right. And for you, what I see is, of course, you want to win, but then you have a secondary thing, which is, like you say, you want to be competitive. Then you have a third thing, which is you want it to be entertaining.
Yes, I mean, I think that at the end of the day, a lot of people it's very hard to understand sort of the separation. A lot of people assume that my streaming career, which of course I do stream chess, is sort of connected to my playing career. They're symbiotic. I would say they aren't really at this point. Even if I were to do very poorly, a lot of the fans who watch me online, they still are going to watch my live streams, even if I fall to number 20 in the world. Now, for me, if I fall to number 20 in the world, I probably just won't play professional chess anymore, because I won't be competitive. If I'm not competitive, I'm obviously not going to enjoy losing every game. So yeah, I think for Magnus, being number 1 mattered a lot. For me, something like being number 1 in the world was not a realistic goal, I would say, after maybe 2010 or 2011. And when something like that isn't a realistic goal, it's not something that ever factors in. But I would also say that the thing with Magnus, and this comes back to like great champions, is that even if you might think that would add a lot of pressure on him, he makes the right decisions and the right things happen in all these critical moments. If you look at the World Championship in 2018, if he lost even a single game in that match, he would not have been the number 1 player in the world. But champions, they have that way of of getting it done when it ultimately matters. And, as far as myself, obviously it's not on the same level, but you are right that in recent years when I do compete, I actually have found I do have this tendency to be a big clutch performer and win games when I need to as well. So yeah, it's amazing.
And do you think that's because like when I used to day trade, so for many years I was a day trader, and then if I had a bad day day trading, I would feel really horrible. But as long as you have other interests, you could diversify. And like, let's say I would go online and play chess as an example. Again, I'm not playing at any kind of level, but it was just a way to get my mind off of day trading or losing the money with something I enjoy doing. And I'm wondering if a little bit you got into streaming, and because you're so excited and proud of how you're doing there, and you're obviously making good money there, that allows you to take chances or risks in chess that maybe you wouldn't have done before.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think having that stability where I'm not dependent on my income from the results off of chess tournaments changed everything. If that were not the case, I don't think I would be number 2 in the world right now. I really don't. I think there's a good chance that I wouldn't be playing chess professionally. If you look at where I was in 2019, my rating was down. I was in a very bad place mentally. If not for the pandemic and sort of that whole shift in everything in my life, I don't think I would even be playing chess professionally. I really don't think I would. So yeah, streaming definitely has helped me a lot in terms of being able to just enjoy chess for what it is instead of it being this job.
And when you say you were in a bad place mentally, were you like, I mean, I hate to ask it this way, were you crying or were you?
Yeah. So like, let me give you an example. I think there's a Steve, one of my favorite videos that I watch from time to time periodically is Steve Jobs' Stanford speech, which I think many people are familiar with. And he says something like, it's something like you have to enjoy the work you do, you have to love it or something, for work and lovers. I forget the exact quote, but I would say that I did not love chess. When I was playing chess, I was thinking, oh man, I have to go waste 5 hours preparing for this chess game that I'm going to play the next day. I'm going to go play. Probably it's going to be a draw. Probably it's not even going to be exciting. We're not going to create any new ideas in the game. And what I mean by that is that chess has a lot of theory. So many games, first 20 moves, you play something, and generally it can be very boring, and there are a lot of draws at the top level. Nobody wins the game. It's just a tie. So basically the mind says, okay, I have to go waste 5 hours preparing for this game of chess. Probably it's going to be very boring, and we're going to draw the game. Okay, I'm going to maybe finish in 4th or 5th place in a tournament. Okay, great. I travel to the next tournament, do this on and on for the whole year. And in 2019, actually, this was the case because I traveled for something like 280 days a year playing these chess competitions. And it's just the mindset when you're sort of very negative and you're expecting bad things to happen. I found that bad things do actually happen more often than not. And I'd also say that as I've gotten older, there's certain things like manifestation and things of this nature that when I was younger, I thought were complete garbage, complete nonsense. And now I actually, on some level, kind of believe in those things. But it's just when you expect bad things to happen, when you're not enjoying it, you're like, oh, I have to go waste time doing this. It's going to be, I'm going to do okay, but Magnus is going to win every tournament. These sorts of things, it's not productive. And in general, it's this loop of negativity, and that does not help.
And there's also this fear, right? Because let's say you're 33 and you've devoted your entire life to just getting good at chess. Like you said, you're traveling 280 days in that year for chess. And to think that this might not be what you continue doing, did you think, I'm going off a cliff here? What am I going to do?
Yeah, I mean, it was obviously very scary for me at that time because I am thinking about it. And if I don't get these invitations, my income goes down. I mean, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know. And
what are you going to even? What's your choice? Are you going to be an accountant? What are your choices?
Yeah, I mean that's one of the very tough things about chess is that at a young age you have to make that decision whether you're going to approach it professionally or whether you're going to go into another field. And so yeah, I mean I think what I would have done. I mean maybe I would have tried to do something like streaming anyway, but it's very scary because you have no safety net, and it was definitely on my mind in 2019 specifically. I didn't know what I was going to do, and it's very scary at that age with no safety net. I mean, potentially no career as a chess player. I mean, there are other things you can do in chess, but obviously it's not like teaching chess you can do, but it's not a lot of fun for most people. And also my stepfather teaches, so it's something I'm very familiar with and not something I ever want to do. So yeah, you don't know what to do. So you feel desperate on some level. And I think when you have this desperation, you have this great fear, it does impact your play as well.
And so there's a lot of streamers out there. And I think back in 2020, there was a lot of streamers who weren't necessarily good chess players. You had Agad Madar, King Crusher, you had all these guys. And to look at them, it was actually very inspirational that chess was creating all these opportunities, even if you weren't, Magnus or Hikaru and among the best, you could still make a good living. And just like a sportscaster doesn't have to be a great football player, they could be a sportscaster instead and make millions of dollars. But suddenly chess was creating these opportunities. And then I think you kind of changed the game a little bit with streaming because you were a great player who is now streaming. But again, a lot of good players stream. They don't also always have the skills of streaming. And maybe like, how did you develop? You have to be a good entertainer. You have millions of people watch you.
Right. So again, I think what I would say to that is, again, to use the Steve Jobs, there's this quote I remember quite well, which is, you can only connect the dots looking backwards, not looking forward. And for me, in a way, when I look back, it makes perfect sense how this happened, because when I was very young, I actually played a lot of chess on the Internet Chess Club when I was young. This is like late 90s, early 2000s.
By the way, I helped start ICC back in 1992. I wrote some of the code for that.
Very nice.
So
like, I would play there, and one of the things that I did was sometimes I would actually type in moves or type sort of commentary while I was playing. I was doing this when I was like 11, 12, 13 years old, and it's a different form of communication versus, say, live streaming where you're actually talking out loud versus typing. But I already had some of this stuff from my younger days where I was doing this. So it was actually not so difficult for me to transition into it, or I started live streaming, but definitely at the start I was very awkward. I think one thing, and this is one thing that I've definitely tried very hard, I think, to change about chess, or I hope people can appreciate, is that a lot of people think of chess players as being these massive geniuses who are super smart and everything else. And I do think there is, the stereotype exists for a reason. So I think if you go back maybe 100, 200 years ago, a lot of the top chess players were actually geniuses. Many of them were like engineers, they were like pianists or economists or all these different things, or math professors. One of the world champions was actually a math professor. That was his main job. So for me, like I've really tried very hard to sort of convey that chess players aren't geniuses. And I think the thing is with chess players, because chess players get treated a certain way within the chess world where people think they're geniuses, they're treated with so much respect, it's very hard to kind of open up and share with people who don't necessarily treat you that way, or you're in a situation where it's completely foreign and you're just talking to random people. So I think that's one of the biggest difficulties for the top players is finding a way to communicate with people who are not completely in awe of them, because in the chess world people are completely in awe of the top players. That's just how it goes.
And to your point, I think culturally, like in the world, chess, which let's say it's, I don't know how old, but let's say it's 1,500 years old. It was a game of kings, right? It wasn't like the serfs or peasants played chess. It was called the royal game. The kings played chess. And then there is an association of chess with being superior in strategy, being like a military kind of thing. Like it's usually used as a metaphor for military. In almost every single TV show, when they try to show that the characters are smart or strategic or even sneaky, they have them playing chess at some point in the show. So yeah, there's this cultural value to being a good chess player.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also, one thing for most of my life, I always wondered why chess wasn't bigger. Now, I'm very fortunate that I actually saw some really memorable events. For me, my probably favorite chess experience ever was in 1995. There was a world championship between Garry Kasparov and Vishwanathan Anand that was held at the World Trade Center. I was very lucky. I actually got to go to that match on one of the days that they played there. But even besides saying that, I'm someone who, like, for example, I'll watch CNBC or something like this, and I feel like I don't know how frequent it is, but it feels like probably once an hour you'll see some ad where there's someone in a park playing chess. Like, it could be insurance, it could be any number of things with strategy. But you see chess is everywhere in culture. And I think from a very young age, I always wondered why chess wasn't bigger. Like, why do I see it everywhere, but it's not that big of a deal? And I think also, like, even if it's subconscious, I think when I went into creating content, just be clear, there is a slight difference between live streaming and say making YouTube videos, just because live streaming, you're live in person. Videos you can edit and do all these different things. But I think when I went into doing all the content creation, I saw a path to try and do something that could make chess bigger and much more accessible. And I was right. And there's a lot. When it comes back to strategy, I think one thing that chess players are very bad at, not trying to speak poorly about like my colleagues or anything, but I think
Go ahead.
notion of transition, I think the thing with chess is, if you can take those lessons and transition them, assuming you're not a top player, but if you can take those lessons and transition them to other areas of life or other areas of business, I think that's the biggest thing chess can give you, is the ability to do that. Whether you can apply that is always a tough tough question, because in chess, you come with a strategy, you come with thinking ahead, but can you actually think ahead when it matters? And I think for me, when I look at the live streaming specifically in 2020, there was a lot of planning that went into many different things. And I would say one thing actually, and this comes back to playing chess, is very early on, I had a tough decision when I was making YouTube videos and I started doing some of these recaps of my games where after I play, I do these 15-minute videos, was whether I wanted to dumb down my content. Now, if you look at chess, the smart move is, of course, to reach the biggest audience. I mean, that's in business too. You're looking, where is the biggest group of consumers? And in chess, that group is players who are basically beginner. I'm not going to use ratings, but basically beginner level. There's a big pocket. I'd say probably, I'm going to guess like 85% of players are people who just started the game or played for a couple of months. That is the biggest market by far.
But is that a market that's passionate about viewing chess online?
I mean, I think they want to watch it, but the thing is, if I do stuff that's not stuff that they don't understand, because I'm talking high level chess concepts, some amount of them are never going to watch my content, no matter what I do, no matter who I am. But I made the decision actually very early on to not cater to this, to try and keep the level high, because I always did think that I would want to play top level chess. And this comes back to another area of chess too, but generally chess is a game where I would say the simplest way of putting it is you learn 1,000 rules and then you learn how to break every single rule as you get better and better at the game, as you progress through the levels. And with chess, if you start doing things at a very basic level, and a lot of people who teach chess have this issue, you start thinking about the game in a much more simplistic way. And so instead of sort of seeing the 1,000 rules and how to break them, you see the 1,000 rules and you're trying to follow them to a T, because that's what you're trying to convey to your viewers, or you're trying to convey to your students if you're teaching chess.
Oh my gosh, this is my favorite sponsor because, as some of you might know, I lived for about 3 years in just Airbnbs. I didn't want to own. I didn't even want to rent. So I just started staying in Airbnbs. And yet I didn't have to deal with any kind of maintenance. I didn't have to deal with anything really. I had like plates, towels, furniture, TVs, cable TV. I didn't have to deal with any of all the stuff that people have to deal with when they start renting. So I loved staying in Airbnbs. I did it for about 3 years, or almost about 3 years. Whenever I stay in an Airbnb, I think this is such a great idea for people who own a home. Whenever they travel, you can make money while you're not using your place. Your home might be worth more than you think. Find out how much at airbnb.com/host.
Have you ever brought your magic to Walt Disney World like, hey, we came to play? Did you tip your tiara to a Creole princess or get goofy officially? Step up like a boss and save the day? Or see what life's like under the tree of life? Did you? If you could. Would you? When we come through, it's true magic. 'Cause we came to play. Bring the magic at Walt Disney World Resort.
So for me, very early on, I made a conscious decision that I was not going to dumb it down, because I was always hoping that I would be able to play in top level tournaments. This is just one example of like strategy where maybe it was right, maybe it was wrong.
That's interesting, because let's say everybody's out there making educational videos like, have an open file, grab it, or blah, blah, blah. And you were saying, it seems like even like in your earlier videos, you were like doing, 1 minute chess, which people advise, obviously, teachers advise not to play. You were doing, disrespect runs where you were just, giving up a queen and then crushing people. So you weren't playing by the rules even of, the top streamers out there who were trying to be educational, like, oh, here's a classic game. Here's what Capablanca did in this point. You were just kind of going in there and you had a different vision of how entertaining chess could be.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly, like I obviously could try to be different, but definitely, well, different is a relative term, of course. But yeah, I decided very early on that I was going to try to stay true to my roots of being this top level player. And I mean, I would also say that there is nobody else doing it too. So, if you want to talk about having a moat or having some advantage, like in a way that does give me a bit of an advantage, because if there's no one else doing it, I'm the only game in town.
But I think the no one else doing it is because it's hard. Like
Yeah,
I think
you're
other
right,
people
you're right,
tried.
yeah. No, I mean, I would say actually, I don't think any of the other top players really have tried. You've had maybe one or two who have. I think that the biggest thing is that with chess players, I think they have this mentality that the world, and I think this also comes from actually what I was saying earlier about how when you play tournaments and you start getting into this, it's work, it's grinding, it's do this little things here and there. It's more about maintaining what you have. It's not about taking risks. I think a lot of top players, they sort of view, you have this old world mentality where you're supposed to do things in chess a certain way, especially as it relates to training for games, getting ready for tournaments, playing competitions, where you're supposed to prepare before the tournament, spend X amount of hours every single day looking at chess. Before the event, you play the event, same thing. After the event, same thing, where you're doing this day after day after day. And you're not supposed to be doing these things that are like improper or whimsical or however you want to put it.
And are you afraid? Are people afraid their peers will look down on them?
They might look down. They also think it's going to hurt their chess. They think it's actually going to be it's going to detract from what they're doing in chess versus being added value. And so it's like one of these things where it's like, okay, you take 3 hours string or something. Okay, what am I doing? It's going to hurt my chess, and I'm not making a lot of money. Why bother? What am I doing? Now, to be fair, I mean, obviously I was in the right place at the right time with the pandemic, but none of these top players during the pandemic actually tried to do it. You know, when the pandemic happened in March of 2020, I don't think any other player who's in the top 50 in the world did live streaming probably until I would say the middle of 2021. None of them even tried, even though they were all at home and they had the ability. And I think it's just because the trying something new or doing something they thought might perhaps hurt their chess, they didn't want to take that risk. They didn't want to take that risk. And I was lucky enough that I was in a position where I could take the risk, and I mean, maybe not could, but I was doing so poorly in terms, but there was nothing to lose from taking that risk, I guess you could say.
When did you first start to feel like, oh, this streaming thing is getting bigger, I might be good at it, and you did have skills at it? Like I think a lot of top players, when I see them play, chess online, they just sort of play and they don't talk and they make little tiny comments here and there. Like, there used to be the banter blitz stuff, and it was almost very uncomfortable to watch some of that. But you were engaging the audience, and you had formats that you would play, like, kind of the speed run style, or today I'm going to sacrifice my queen, or I'm just going to play king to e2 on the second move, the Bond cloud opening, and you made it fun as a great player.
Yeah, so I think when I look back, when it started to become very real for me, it was around April or May of 2020. And what happened during that period of time is that the big streamers on Twitch at the time, they started getting into chess. And one of the ways that you can grow the base or get people really interested is having this crossover between different communities. So if you have the chess community, there's a certain amount of people in it, but there are a lot of people who are not in the chess community who maybe they'll get an interest in it. Let's just say you have, a million people. If even 10% of those people get interested in chess and start consuming content for some amount of time, let's say 6 to 12 months, that's already huge versus not having them find that spark to get into chess at all. And it was in April of 2020 when I did some collaborations with the biggest streamer on the platform at the time. His name is XQC, that it really started to change. Because prior to that, I would say I was averaging maybe a few thousand viewers. It was actually already quite a big size. It was already probably 3,000-4,000, I think, on average prior to that. But once I did that collaboration, it exploded to north of 10,000 concurrent viewers that I had every single day. That's when I started to realize that it was for real. When I combined that with the event that happened shortly thereafter, it was called PogChamps, which had big streamers from across different communities who competed in the chess tournament, which was in June of 2020. When those two events happened, and then the pandemic was not ending at that time, that's when I actually started to realize that this probably was going to be my job. And also, I mean, to be fair, at this time, because there were no sports or anything else going on, there were a lot of sponsorship opportunities that I never had during my chess career either. So like the income was already shooting up as well. So I would say it was this period between April and June that I started to realize it was going to be very serious. And then I would say by the end of 2020, I already knew that I was never going back to playing 10 to 12 chess tournaments a year and doing that as my main job.
And what skills do you think you were learning at this time to become a better streamer? And I always do use the word entertainment, because I think you can't just be a great chess player. You can't just be a great anything. You have to be able to communicate that to the world and through some entertaining means. And you did develop skills.
Yeah, I think it's silly to say this, but I think the most important thing that I learned along the way is to not be so serious about myself. I think from the time I was very young, I would say probably from the time I was 10 or 11, the way that I got really good at chess was sort of having a me against the world attitude, sort of like I enjoyed the hate. I enjoyed people not liking me. I enjoyed just wanting to like prove people wrong, shove it in your face, all this sort of stuff. And probably growing up in New York didn't hurt with that, having that attitude. But I would say that I always had that, like me against the world attitude, being super serious all the time. And I think when I learned to kind of just like not be that serious, to kind of relax and not be so angry, that helped me a lot. That's a long process even before streaming, but I think for streaming specifically, learning to sort of not hold things personally. I think even now sometimes I can get annoyed by comments on the internet, but in general, it's just like not being so serious, not being so tense about everything, and just trying to share your personality, what you've done. Because I think this happened the other day, and I saw Levy, actually, Gotham Chess. He made a tweet about how Barcelona is his new favorite city. And, when you grow up with a certain perspective of the world, like let's just say traveling, for example, for me, when I was 10 years old, I went to Barcelona because my brother played a youth tournament. I was there. I think I went to Barcelona. I was 11, 12, 13. And it's very easy when you grow up with a certain perspective of thinking certain things are normal when they actually are not normal. And that's the second thing. Is that I also learned that what's normal to me is actually not normal for most people. And it's very fascinating to hear about traveling around the world or meeting different people, all these different things. And it also comes back to another point, which like when I was on Twitch, sometimes I'd watch people do these IRL streams where they go out, they walk around like Tokyo, or they go to some city. And to me, I'm just like, what is this nonsense? There's nothing special to this. But of course, I've been out there in the world. I've traveled a lot. So to me, it's not special or exciting. But for a lot of people who don't have these opportunities in life, it really is. So it's really learning how to convey those stories, convey everything that I've done in a way that I think people who haven't had the chance to experience them will enjoy hearing about. And there are a lot of these stories.
Yeah, because think about it. You've been like the top 20, or let's say the top 50 players. How many of them have you known since you were 12 years old?
Yeah, exactly. Most of them. I mean, that's
an odd thing.
Yeah, it's like I was doing some interview recently, and I was thinking to myself, like, in a way, outside of my direct family, like somebody like Magnus, even though he's a major competitor of someone that on some level, like, I don't like him or things like this. Of course, I respect him, but he's like, in a way, when I quit, he's like one of the few people that I'm actually going to have shared most of my life experiences with, him, Fabiano, and a few others, more than anyone else. And so it's like we're like enemies, but we're also friends and all these other things. And
you ever call each other and just like, hey, how's it going?
I mean, not now, but I mean, I think especially as I would say, especially as we get older and the end is closer than the beginning, I think you sort of, the bygones become bygones, and it's all about the respect. So maybe not now, but I wouldn't be shocked in a few years if that's the case.
And the streaming, okay, so it's kicking off, you're getting sponsors, you're realizing this is a business. How has it become a business? Like, how many employees do you hire to run this business for you, and how have you grown and expanded it?
Yeah, so at the very start, I mean, it was basically myself, one moderator that I had, and then a few other unpaid employees. And that grew very quickly. I think that live streaming is not particularly difficult from the standpoint of the staff that you need to maintain it. But when you start trying to create content, unless you have someone who can do all the different things, for example, editing, thumbnails, the tags, the titles, all these different things. And there are people who are geniuses at this, but you need to have more people. So at the very start, it was really just 3 people. I had one moderator that I paid, and I had one editor / thumbnail artist. He did both, who was doing all my videos throughout 2020. But one of the things is, and this speaks to how difficult it is as like an online content creator, influencer, however you want to coin the term, is that in order to be successful, you're very beholden to the algorithms. And probably the golden rule, I would say, with any form of content creation is that you're very consistent. And that means doing it basically every day. So in 2020, when you're riding these new highs every day, whether it's in live streaming, the viewership numbers, ad revenue, sponsors, or creating YouTube content where the numbers are so out of this world high that you almost can't believe it, very easy to run on the adrenaline. But once you see the downtick, which I think started after Queen's Gambit, I would say like March, April of 2021, it's people burned out. So I ended up having to hire actually multiple thumbnail artists. I have quite a few people making the thumbnails. I have, I would say, 3 to 4 editors as well. So all in all, my team is it's about, I would say I pay 10 people.
And what about people to pursue sponsorships and business development, stuff like that?
So, I mean, we live in a very different world now than we did at the time. In 2020, I would say 2020 through 2022, there were a lot of sponsorship opportunities from many mainstream companies. So I actually had representatives. I was at United Talent Agency, and then what was the other one? WME, William Morris Endeavor. In recent times, I'm not actually with an agency. I think it's, as I look at the landscape now, I don't want to. I mean, luckily, I will say I'm glad that like I don't like run a company or something which is like publicly traded, because I don't have it in me to sort of like make up things or try to always sound super rosy when I'm not. But the sponsorship opportunities are very few and far between. I think that live streaming is still very big, but it's not confined, I would say, to like one platform the way that it used to be. And so there just aren't the same opportunities. And for that reason, I'm just on my own these days. I have a couple of people who help with emails, but I don't have an agency or anything along those lines.
So what do you think is the next evolution in terms of like staying in either content creation or streaming? Like what's going to happen? Or what do you see?
You mean chess or in general?
And in chess streaming, chess content creation.
I mean, chess content creation, I think it's very stable right now. You have certain channels that are doing very well. You have Levy, of course, Gotham Chess. You have myself, where we're by far and away the two biggest. I think that what needs to happen is you need more of the top players getting into it. Now, one of the exciting things currently is that a lot of the top players are juniors. There are many kids who are coming up through the ranks, who are starting to break through. So they're not as dogmatic. They're not stuck in the old ways as much. And even, as another example of something that's changed, I was talking about right and wrong, like you do things a certain way. When I was growing up, almost none of the top chess players played chess online. They just didn't compete online.
I mean, could you imagine like, I was thinking this, like, can you imagine like Petrosian or Smyslov being like a Twitch streamer? Like it's
Right,
crazy,
exactly.
like that style of player. And that's earlier
Yeah,
in the 90s, but
right. I mean, but even Kasparov, I mean, even Anand, I mean, those guys,
Yeah.
they played very sporadically. But now what you have is like everybody plays online, which is very good for the game because it gives these kids in a lot of these poor countries a chance to compete against the best players in the world. And the whole view of online chess is that it's actually very serious. It's legitimate. It's worth spending time to go online and play Blitz because there are competitive tournaments. You have Magnus online, you have me online. And so that has shifted completely. And that's one way it's shifted. And so like all the kids now who are breaking into the top 10 in the world, these kids have grown up where that is a new normal. They do actually play a lot of chess online. So I'm somewhat optimistic that because there's already this shift where playing online is normal, that even seeing someone like me making this content will be perceived as being more normal as well. And these kids will actually take up that mantle and they'll get into it. I think that's the big question, is whether these kids, whether they choose to pursue this or whether they start doing what everyone else has done in the past. And I don't know the answer to that, but I think if they start doing it, the future could be very, very bright.
And there's always the danger, like you had in 2020 though, where you're hitting, or 2019, you're hitting this cliff in potential income of chess. So you go into streaming at some point, whether it's because interest slows or there's too much competition, perhaps there becomes that cliff even in streaming or content creation. And I've seen and I've heard that you've been diversifying your income further, like you've been getting more into, and you talk about this on your stream, you've been getting more into investing and whether it's stocks or real estate. I know you do some real estate stuff. Like what other things are you doing now?
Yes, there's a lot of stuff that I do. I mean, I obviously own a lot of properties in real estate, a lot of rentals.
Why is that obvious? I didn't know that.
Oh, did I say it's not? Oh, I meant obvious because I assume you listen to my stream. Sorry.
I do listen to your stream. I just didn't know.
Sorry.
To what extent you've owned a lot of properties.
Yeah, I mean, I would say actually that was one of the smart things, or one of the things, and I mean maybe I'm unique in this way, but this is also very true of chess in general. Is there are a lot of people, whether they're in the chess world or like, and by that I mean like players or organizers or sponsors, or people who just play as kids and then moved on. And there are a lot of people I know from my childhood who have gone on to be very successful in other areas. And I actually try very hard to keep in contact with a lot of these people because you never know when there will be opportunities outside of chess. So I think I can say his name. You actually probably know AJ, I'm guessing you've heard the name. But one of the people that...
I think I'm Facebook friends with him, but we never met.
Yeah, well, he challenged Peter to like a game for $1 million or something, one of those marketing gimmicks. But one of my good friends in Florida, AJ Seidman, he's actually been in real estate for a long time, and I think it was in 2017 or 2018 that he approached me, about trying to buy some properties, basically renting them out, the usual, get a mortgage, rent them out, and everything, and kind of that coincided with the rise in my income in 2018, 2019, and then 2020. So we actually acquired a lot of properties, which we currently own in Florida and Georgia, although one of them is a bit of an issue right now because it's a Section 8 and there are these sorts of things, which are always a hassle. But that's one thing. But then also, of course, not of course. I say of course because I think of myself with all the things I've said on my stream. But from a very
that's good, by the way. Like take someone like me. I watch your stream, listen to it, but I think I haven't listened to every single thing.
Yeah. And in my mind, I'm thinking that I've said these things probably 100 times on my stream. So I think, yeah, of course, it's obvious, right? But it's not to the listener. The other thing, and this is much more longer term, that's it, of course, stop. Now I'm starting to talk like a streamer again. So from a very young age, I've had an interest in investing. I think this started, it's two things. It's the perspective of the childhood and what I remember of my childhood in the early days. Very specifically, when I spent the first about 5-6 years of my life in the Mojave Desert, about 2 hours north of Los Angeles, and let's just say lower middle class, I would say, lower middle class. And a lot of the memories that I have, or the memories I remember as a kid, are from that time period, more actually than sort of a more affluent period of my life in White Plains, outside the city. So like I've internalized a lot of that from a very young age, those sort of struggles, And then I think it was when I was about 15 or 16, my mom actually, she bought me this book on investing. One of our neighbors in the building we lived in White Plains, he'd written a book. I actually found it recently, but I don't remember what the title is right off. It was about investing. It was mostly about like mutual funds, things like this. That got me quite interested in, not in the stock market specifically, but in trying to create long-term wealth. And then around 17 or 18, my favorite book that I read was the Bogle book, Bogle on mutual funds. So it's just this red book. I remember reading it many times. That or Jeremy Siegel's book, Stocks for the Long Run. So I read a lot of books about it, and I also had a little bit of money at the time. So I started very early on investing in mutual funds. Eventually, I shifted over to ETFs. They weren't really that popular, so much of a thing in the mid 2000s, but I slowly shifted over there. And the main reason that I got into the market is because I didn't think chess was something I was going to be doing forever. And I really did. I wanted to be able to support myself and have passive income down the road. So that's something I've been doing on and off since the mid 2000s. These days, it's pretty boring. It's mostly index funds or companies that pay good dividends. I still do gamble like in GameStop every so often.
It's hard not to view the market as a game, I think.
Right, but one thing, there's another good friend of mine who I know who also does a lot in business, and he said this, and he's right. One of, I think, the big advantages to playing chess as it relates to, say, the stock market or life in general, actually, is that in a single game of chess, you're making so many decisions, so many calculations. Do I play this move? Do I play that move? And in life, very rarely do you make that many decisions. Very, very rarely. I mean, what are the big decisions you make in life? I mean, probably whether to get married, whether to have kids, whether to buy a house, or maybe buy a nice car. Those are really, I think, where to go to college, probably. Those are probably the only 5 things in life I can think of that are major decisions. So in life, generally, you're not having to make a lot of decisions. You're not thinking about it. I think many people are averse to making decisions. I mean, you look at a lot of companies, you don't have individuals making them. It's like a panel, it's a board. I mean, it's a group decision as opposed to individuals making decisions.
That's a good point.
So for me, that's one of the great things that I like about the market, is that like I'm trying to calculate, but I'm making these decisions. And making decisions comes very naturally to me because I'm already doing that in chess. So it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to make great decisions. You obviously can make mistakes. Most people do. But just I really enjoy the process of trying to analyze and come to conclusions and make the right decisions.
I'm wondering if there's an analogy, too, in terms of analyzing risk. Like, let's say you're playing a chess game. And again, it's I'm not going to try to put myself in your mind during a game. But let's say you're trying to make a decision in chess. There's a lot of good possibilities. Like, oh, if I make this move, maybe I can attack the king. But then, okay, you could have that idea in a half a second, and then the rest of your thinking is, what are the risks? How do you remove risk from that position? And just like in the market or in business in general, oh, this would be a great idea. It's easy to come up with a great idea, but then the rest of the time is removing risk from that idea.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, like to go back to chess for a second, that's definitely true. There's definitely games where you try to control it, where it's like you essentially want to make sure that you have the tie, but if your opponent makes one wrong move, you have a chance to win the game, but there's no chance of a loss. You want to have like basically a 66% chance of getting the optimal outcome, or 33% chance of getting the absolute outcome, and 33% of an okay one. right?
Or
Just math
66% of an okay
Yeah,
one.
sorry, 66%
A two-result game.
Yeah. Two results instead of three results. So yeah, it's exactly 66% draw, 33% win, but 0% chance of loss. So definitely in chess, for myself, there are situations where I try to mitigate the risk, and I think that the best players in the world at the quicker forms of chess, like blitz chess, where you play games in 5 minutes for the whole game, are magnets and myself, because we are able to actually incorporate that into those games as well, not just in the slow games where you have a ton of time to think about it. So, and then back to the market, of course, I mean, a lot of it is analyzing and thinking about the outcomes. And I think in many cases, people don't generally, I mean, I'm talking about like the everyday person, you aren't in situations where you think about these sorts of things. It's just not something that's in your life. That's why I think for chess, it's a great thing to take up, because the ability to analyze, even if it's not going to make some huge difference in your life overall, I think it can be beneficial.
And with real estate, I agree with you, by the way, that real estate is potentially a good investment if you don't live in the real estate. So I think by the way, I own a home, so I'm giving advice against what I've actually ended up doing in the past few years. Like for a while, I would never own a home. I hated the idea. I lost money on every home I owned. And I didn't even like renting. I would just live in Airbnbs for a long time and just live very minimally. But it's very hard to make money, I think, if you're thinking about it in terms of like, oh, I want to live in this home and then make money on it. It's better to say, oh, I'm going to try to get a good deal in a good place, maybe not where I would live, but where a lot of other people. It gives you much more opportunity to make a good investment if you don't have to live in the investment.
One thing that I would say is when I think about just the general public is that I feel that people, they look at the stock market as a way of getting rich. And I sort of blame the media for that. I think when I was much younger, I remember this very clearly. Now, of course, it's magnified, but you see all these articles about how this person makes $1 million a year and can retire, how this person made 250,000, or like, I think when I was younger, I remember I got this ad for this guy, Bernie Schaefer, the CDs, these options things. You're probably very familiar with that. And it's like, it's all about get rich. And I feel like for someone who doesn't, I mean, nowadays indexing is much more common. A lot of people, the information is much better in terms of what people should do towards passive investing. But I feel like that a lot of people look at it as get rich. And I feel like most people, when they do try to get into the market, if you go and you invest, you're probably going to lose money unless you're indexing. A lot of people try to hit it rich, buy options and acquire out of the money.
The average investor doesn't beat the market.
Exactly. And I feel like with real estate, for someone who just buys their house and they're going to live in it for 20 years, unless they have access to information, or they're curious and they research deeper, it's probably going to be better than trying to invest in the market. I think for most people,
that's probably true.
But I think for just your average Joe, they're going to be better off buying a house they live in for 30 years and having that equity in the house versus investing in the market.
Yeah, I think that's true, because I think people have to be very careful investing. Like there's a lot, let's say 95% of the information out there, including what's on CNBC or the Wall Street Journal, is just bad information. Like you just don't know, okay, NVIDIA is the biggest AI company in the world, and AI is a trend that's going to keep going, but we really have no insight onto how NVIDIA is going to perform next to its peers next year. So it's hard. No, there's no way to predict.
Yeah, I mean, there are many things. Like I would even use like the Roaring Kitty thing, like as another example. Like I don't even know if I believe it's true, because if I were in that situation, like when the stock was 60 plus after hours, of course he should be shorting against the box, selling stock against his 120,000 calls. Like even that. I'm sorry, I'm using a modern example.
No, it's okay.
But it's just an example of like any sane person would be doing that. I mean, I'm not even like in finance in that kind of way, and I would be doing that, of course, just to lock in, the 400% or whatever it is. So yeah, I feel like that's a thing. And also, like my wife, I remember she's someone who asked me about the markets a few years ago when we were dating initially, and she of course used the Robinhood app. And I was absolutely appalled that like maybe the first time that I saw her phone, I saw the app, like there were like literally like there were like animations and graphics when she would like buy a stock. I'm like, wait, what is this?
Yeah, they gamified it.
I was actually shocked by that, because that's of course going the wrong direction. I mean, the way that you make wealth is by long-term investing. I mean, you hold stocks for a long time, and the market does go up over the long term.
And so it's interesting. So you're doing the stuff with real estate. Obviously, you're building the streaming. Obviously, you've come back strong on the chess. How do you like all the other chess players are studying, like you say, 3, 4, 10 hours a day? How do you keep up with the chess? I mean, you're playing a lot of the day, so maybe that helps, but I don't know.
Well, there are many things. I think for a short period of time after the pandemic, my results were really good solely because I had been playing online every day against the top players in the world. I think many people would be surprised to hear this, but professional chess players can be very lazy. And I think that for the most part, during the pandemic, from about March, I would say September, all the other top players, they were just sitting at home in their underwear, just like watching Netflix or doing stuff, but not actually studying chess, whereas I was playing as top players online. And that actually helped me sharpen my game quite a bit. So there I think, was a period when I came back where I was just better than everybody else simply because I was actually sharper. Even though it was online, these were competitive games.
Were you analyzing your blitz games at all? Or
I think it was more the Alpha Zero approach. It's just you play over and over and over again. You just, I mean, of course, I'm playing against other players, not against myself, but you just play over and over and over again. And I think that really, you do benefit off of that. It's not something that I think you can quantify. I mean, as an example, when you start out playing chess, the easiest way to improve is just keep playing games against other players over and over again, because you subconsciously start connecting the dots. You start seeing these patterns, the pattern recognition forms, even if you're not trying to do it. It's just one of those things that subconsciously occurs. So that I think gave me a big edge at the start. I think there are a couple different things. I made this joke to you about how chess is very psychological or mental, and it definitely is. And I think for myself, one of the things that gives me a big advantage over a lot of my fellow competitors is that when I do these live streams, I'm actually explaining my thought process in a very high level way because I chose not to simplify it. And these players, they might not all admit it, but at some point or another during the pandemic, I know like Magnus, Fabiano, Wesley, all these top guys, they watch my stream. And you can analyze games with a player, but when you actually see someone day after day, or I shouldn't say day after day, but game after game, hour after hour, explaining these very high level concepts, it actually makes you more impressed by them than talking to them individually and analyzing a one-off game that you played against them. So you can see hundreds of games, and that actually, I think, changed the perception of me as a player, because then they actually start to respect me more than they used to.
So maybe you're saying you built up this persona that now you're intimidating to a lot of the players.
That's part of it. Yeah, I'm giving the many factors. I think that's a big part of it, though, is that like they probably didn't realize just how good I am. Now, that's not to say that like if I watch one of them do it, if they were to try and do it, I might not be like, wow, he's so good. Like he's seeing all these great ideas. It could cut the other way too. But I think that's one of the things is that they've seen this, so they realize how good I am in a way that they didn't before. Secondarily, I think also it's very hard to rationalize the fact that I don't study chess every day. I don't do things the proper way. I'm still very successful. So it's like, if I'm not doing this the proper way, then I think in their mind, there's also this confusion about, wait, is he studying chess at all? What's going on? Like, is he studying? He's not studying? What do I play? Should I play this opening or not opening? I mean, I think it becomes very tricky to figure out. And then the third component as well is that the style of chess that I play now is very different. And when you play against people for many, many years, over decades, you get very familiar with the style, the sort of choices they make. And the simplest thing I would say is that it's almost like I scramble my brain. So the decision-making process that I take now is not the same process I had in 2019, for example, or even 2015. It's completely different because you're supposed to play a certain way to minimize the risk at times. You're not supposed to play aggressive openings in critical moments. You're supposed to get the desired result, usually a tie or have a chance to win. But I take risks in certain moments when it seems completely illogical. Point in case would be this candidates tournament, the one where you play the World Championship. And I needed to qualify for that candidates tournament, so I was playing the last round of this open event in the Isle of Man. And common thought, or the way someone would think that I would approach the game, is that if I tie this game, I get the draw, I'm going to qualify for the candidates. Qualifying for the candidates has to be the ultimate goal, because that gets you to the World Championship. It gets back to the cycle I was talking about with when you're breaking through about, point A, point B, point C. And so getting to the candidates, that has to be the ultimate goal. That should be the only thing that matters. So if you only need the tie to get there, what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to play the most solid opening and not take any risk. And then in the game, I didn't do that. And my opponent was actually very confused. He was surprised by it. Now,
well, what opening did you play? How did you?
I played a Sicilian. I played the Kalashnikov variation of the Sicilian. But my opponent did not expect that, because the common thought or the way that you approach it is, it's like, why would you do that? You only need this result to get there. But for me, it's also like, I want to enjoy it at the same time. It's not, and also I want to be very unpredictable too. Like the unpredictability factor matters a lot as well.
Oh my gosh, this is my favorite sponsor because, as some of you might know, I lived for about 3 years in just Airbnbs. I didn't want to own. I didn't even want to rent. So I just started staying in Airbnbs. And yet I didn't have to deal with any kind of maintenance. I didn't have to deal with anything really. I had like plates, towels, furniture, TVs, cable TV. I didn't have to deal with any of all the stuff that people have to deal with when they start renting. So I loved staying in Airbnbs. I did it for about 3 years, or almost about 3 years. Whenever I stay in an Airbnb, I think this is such a great idea for people who own a home. Whenever they travel, you can make money while you're not using your place. Your home might be worth more than you think. Find out how much at airbnb.com/host.
I think the streaming gives you the unpredictability card, because your worst case scenario is, okay, I didn't make it to the candidates. That's because I'm a streamer, but this is great content. And so I'm going to use it this way. And then lo and behold, you win because you have the unpredictability.
Right. But I would say but it's all those things combined. It's all those things. But the unpredictability, like I said, there's a certain approach, there's a certain way that you think about it. Everybody thinks the same way. When everybody has the same thinking, I mean, if the way you're thinking about it is different, you can surprise people much more and you can actually do very well. But I would also say the other thing is that the way that I study chess is much better. It's much smarter than it used to be. And I think that also comes back to having more confidence. Like I would say when I was younger and I would play against Magnus, I would literally review every opening under the sun. I'd be so afraid. Honestly, I'd say I'd be so afraid of Magnus that I'd be looking at like 5 different opening systems, or 6 or 7, versus looking at the 2 that he's probably going to play. Now, of course, you have to look at little bits here and there. But when you're trying to look at 7 different things and you're burning out, you're spending all this energy before a game trying to get ready. The odds are going to say that he's most likely going to play 1 or 2. He's not going to play this like 7th option out here. But if you're so afraid of the player, you're so worried or lacking confidence that you need to do that, it's not smart. You're wasting time looking at things that are not going to happen. And so I've gotten a lot better at that too. It's just sort of being practical and trusting myself in a lot of situations.
Like when you play Magnus now, like let's say in this Norway chess tournament, you go in there with a Nimzo. Did you think specifically what variations he would respond with, or?
I did. I mean, I had a feeling he'd probably play something very close to what he did play in the game. I think actually I've gotten very good at predicting. I think I'm able to understand how players approach the game. But I think that it's you look at a couple of opening systems and then you have some general idea elsewhere. So I would say it's like if there are 5 openings, you have something for 3 of the openings, and the last 2 you know a couple of the moves or lines you're going to do, and that's it. And you don't really look very closely at it. But in the old days, it's more like spending an hour on all 5 of these, or spending, say, like hour and a half on these 3, and then just looking for 5 minutes of the other 2.
And how good do you think is your memory now? Like, you play thousands of games online, but you still seem to, I see when you're online, you say, oh, I had this game against Kamsky in the 2009, whatever, and he played this, but now I'm going to try this. And it seems like your memory is still holding up. Like, do you feel like with age, there's any decline, or?
I think my long-term memory is better than my short-term memory. I think that like a lot of things from the past I remember better than like things that I just learn in the moment, for sure. But it changes. I don't think that it's necessarily worse or better. I don't think it's something that ultimately changes that much for the game, whether it's long-term or short-term. But definitely my long-term is better. I would also say though, as I get older, I'm definitely slower. Like one of the big shifts is when I was younger, I really liked blitz chess the most, and now I think I actually like classical chess the most because I like thinking more than I ever used to.
But you're still clearly, like, I mean, your blitz rating at times has exceeded Magnus's, at least on chess.com. Yes. I mean, you've been number 1 on chess.com quite a bit. And so it's not like your blitz is suffering, but I'm wondering if, like, these young kids who are, it's interesting, by the way, the top 20 is made up almost entirely of people in their 30s, like yourself, Magnus, Jan, and others, or kids in their late teens, or at the most age 20. Like Ali Reza is now 20. And where happened to the people in the 20s? There's nobody in their 20s.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably just a generation gap. For whatever reason, they're the people who, yeah, I actually don't know. I think it could just be a generation. Like, I feel in chess, normally there's a gap of about, I feel like the world championship champions, usually it's a 13-year gap between them, or around there, something along those lines. I feel like, if I'm not mistaken, I think about Kramnik to Magnus specifically, or Karpov to Kasparov. So I think there's like a 12, 13-year gap in general, and I think it might just be a lost generation, really, if you were to ask me. But I do think going forward, more and more kids, I think chess players are going to be getting better at younger and younger ages. I think a lot of things that we thought were, impossible in chess 5 years ago, like a grandmaster, maybe 10 or 11 years old, is going to happen in the near future.
And I wonder about that. Like they always say, and I know this is a spurious statistic, but they always say, oh, it takes 10,000 hours to master something. And obviously every year you have more and more experience with chess. And yet there's these 18-year-old, like Prague, 18 years old here in this tournament, who beat Magnus. Where is he getting his information from? Like, how does he have as much knowledge and depth in the game as someone who still studies it every day, who's the number one in the world or number two in the world?
Yeah, I think that comes down to this. Actually, I think a large part of it is related specifically to the chess boom that occurred during COVID times. And what I mean by that is information is basically power in the game of chess. And more specifically, the opening phase of the game. I would say that if you can get through the first 20 moves, the big advantage between the absolute top players and say someone who's number 50 or number 100 in the world is the opening phase. If someone who's 100 in the world can get through the first 20 moves of the game and they're not at some big disadvantage, it's very unlikely they're going to lose to Magnus. Very unlikely. Now, they could lose him, they could lose to me, but I would say that if they get through the 20 moves, they're going to lose maybe 10% of the time, if that. So it's like 1 out of 10. So the big advantage is the opening phase. And because of the pandemic, what happened is a lot of people in chess saw these financial opportunities to try and make more money. And so there's a site called Chessable, which started basically promoting chess courses. And a lot of strong grandmasters, I mean, people who were like top 100 in the world, people who were like top 10 even in the world, started making these courses and putting all this information out there. And what that does is, in the past, you would have to hire these people, pay them, and they would give you some of the secret sauce, some of the work that they would do. But now you can basically pay $50 and get all this information for free. And it's not just like one top player. There are many top players doing this. And even if you try to hide some of that information, like one line here, one line there, isn't actually the absolute best variation, and you're going to play something else if you have it in your games, it's still so much information these players can go through it and consume it and really just remember it better than past generations. I mean, kids these days, they grow up with computers, and that has made a world of difference. It's just the amount of information out there from openings to like playing Blitz online to all these courses, everything. It's just so much better for the kids today. And I think they can just do it hour after hour. They grow up with iPads and phones these days. So they're just much better at processing the information, and in a much shorter time, of course, because they're also much younger.
And this is going to get a little bit more into actually, before I get totally into the weeds of chess, just for a second, in the candidates, this recent candidates, Gukesh won, 17-year-old, the youngest person to ever win the candidates. Is going to challenge the world champion Ding Liren. I saw in an interview right after the candidates, obviously you were emotional, even, let's say teared up a little bit. And then you were trying to explain in the interview why you teared up. But I think it was pretty clear you were disappointed you didn't win the candidates.
No, that's not the reason, unfortunately.
Well, tell me.
No, I mean, part of it is it's actually not about me directly. What I would say is that for me, I'm very realistic about the future. And in that event, like my parents were there. My brother actually came for one day. And like, I don't want to sound like morbid or anything, but there's a saying that, when you're dying or something, that like your life flashes in front of your eyes, something along these lines. I've heard this quote quite a few times. And it's sort of just seeing the whole progression from the start to where I am today, and sort of realizing how great it's been, but how much I could have accomplished. And actually, like the hardest part with the candidates was not about me. It's that I had all these members who actually wanted me to win it more than I did. So like that actually was the pressure for me than the pressure that I put on myself for that event. But certainly, I mean, it was a disappointment considering how close I was, but I also would say that it wasn't that big of a shock to me, because when I go back to 2016, I already knew there was a bit of a luck component there. And you could make the argument that in this past event, like there were a couple of critical matchups at the end that were in the player's favor, the one who won. Now, mind you, he deserved to win. Like, I'm not saying he didn't deserve to win, but if Fabiano or myself or Nepo or some of the other players had gotten that same pairing, there's a very good chance we could have won. So yeah, I mean, it was definitely a little bit disappointing, but on the other hand, it's like I've always said, and maybe it's just a mindset thing. I felt like I've been playing with house money, and I also felt that it really comes full circle, because when I compare the candidates tournament that I played in 2020, just now in 2024 versus 2016 specifically, 2016, I had the same start. I drew a game early and then I lost. And once I lost that game early, I felt very much like there was this pressure. I have to win the next game. I have to take these risks. I must win a game. Like, as opposed to being patient and waiting for the opportunities to present themselves. And in the one that I just played in 2024, when I tied a game early and then lost, I had a couple more ties, and then I started winning some games towards the middle and towards the latter half of the event. And that is something that if I look at my chess career prior to streaming, I never could have done that in the candidates, never. So I was also very proud of the performance. But disappointment, I would say, I mean, mildly disappointed, but it was never like a massive disappointment simply because I never had a chance to win the game. I never had that moment in a game where I can say, if I play this move, I win the tournament.
But was there a sense that this might be the last time?
But actually, just to a side note, I can say that about this tournament, which is why I'm actually more disappointed with this event than that event, because there was a game here against Alireza Firouzja, I think in the 8th round, I believe it was. I had the game won. If I played one move, I would have won that game. And so there's much more disappointed with this event than that one.
By the way, I was in the audience that for that game, and so again, I didn't have access to computer or commentary or anything, and it did look like you had, after Bishop C4, it looked like you had two choices, C6 and Rook D8, and I was really curious, how did you decide between the two?
The way that I decided between the two is I thought that if I went C6, the pawn structure would become fixed in the center. And I thought that after Rook D8, I'd be able to play B6 and go after the pawns on D4 and C5. That's what I thought. I thought with the Rook on D5, the pawns on D4 and C5 were weaker. If I go C6, there's only the one open E file, and I can't really open up the queen side.
And then I don't know, but like if C6 Queen E1, you did Rook D8, he did Queen E1 and penetrated. C6 Queen E1, what do you do to kind of stop him from?
I just take the pawn H5 and play Rook E8 to take the E file.
All right. So
yeah, but I mean, again, that's kind of beside the point. But the thing is, I had the chance. Like that game, if I'd played that move, I would say probably like 80% certainty that I win that game. So like, I actually am much more upset about that because I had the chance to win, whereas in the candidates, I never had the chance to actually win. And then back to your other point about whether it's the end. I mean, obviously, I think these days I think about it a lot more than I ever used to. It's not so much that I'm not competitive. It's more that like, I want to live life. I think a lot of people see whether it's content creation or playing chess is like a lot of fun, and it is fun, but there's also a lot to it that is pretty negative, having to deal with the trolls on the internet day in and day out, having to make content every single day. Like it does, there is a lot of wear and tear, and it's very easy to burn out. So yes, definitely. I think when you ask me about being emotional or thinking about the last time, definitely could be, absolutely.
And so, yeah, so what would be like, even if you get burnt out on like the content creation stuff or the chess world in general, like what would be next? Because you're still very young.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I have some thoughts about possibilities. Do something with AI, something. Maybe start a company, do something chess related in AI. That's one of the thoughts that I've had. Primarily, I would say also because some of the content I do now, for example, like on one of my channels, it's all AI generated thumbnails, for example. I don't actually have someone doing that. It's just on one of my backup channels. But that's made me start to think about the possibilities of what could be possible down the road.
You're sort of like testing the waters to see what excites you.
Yeah, I would say something along those lines. I mean, I certainly think that I want to do something with chess going forward, even if I stop playing or I stop making content. I mean, I think I have a pretty good idea of when that time is going to come for me. But yeah, there are other things that I have an interest in. I mean, probably, I don't know, something related to finance maybe down the road. Who knows? Possibly. But I mean, even that, there's stresses there too. So
there's a lot of stresses in there, but there's a lot of. You know what I've noticed is that in every subculture that's interesting and exciting, and I would say the chess subculture is one, the finance world to some extent to some areas of the finance world, but there's always going to be like really bad people. And they're the ones who are going to be in your face the more successful you get. So you have to kind of figure out how to balance that.
Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult dealing with that. And that also, I mean, I think that's one of the things that with streaming specifically, I learned very early on in order to be successful is that you can't take things personally. You really do have to just let it roll off your back. And it's very hard as a chess player. I mean, for most of my life, I've been incapable of that. But you have to sort of just let it go at some point. And
it's very hard. Like as a writer, I've often written controversial stuff that's, I don't want to say has gotten me into trouble, but has gotten me the viral trolls. And unfortunately, I learned too late, the best way to respond is to not respond. Because when you respond, you're lending them your entire audience that you've spent, let's say, 20 years building. You're just giving it to some troll to piggyback off of.
Yeah, actually, I was going to say, I forgot there was a second part of that. Like, besides letting it roll off your back, one thing that I learned very early on, this might even be the most valuable thing, probably. I mean, it's not most valuable in terms of like being financially successful, but most valuable in terms of being successful just as an online content creator is that when people write really nasty things, one of the best things, or the best thing I would say that you can do is actually take the words and turn it into a joke in a way. It's like you take the sting out of the word. When someone says something and you turn it into a bit of a joke or it becomes funny, that takes all the sting out of what they're trying to do.
Right, and it makes some of their followers you appear likable to them. It also kind of energizes your crew. It's tricky though. That's a hard balance. Like lately, I've been taking the tack just to ignore because it's too easy to just fall into the rabbit hole of trolldom when you
Yeah,
respond.
no, absolutely. I think, I mean, for example, I feel like every day I see some comment on my YouTube videos or I see some comment on X, and you see that, and it's just like, you know that if you respond, they've actually succeeded in a way.
Right.
So,
Because they watch
yeah,
you all the time and
Right.
you don't know them. So they know what buttons to press, but you don't know what buttons you can press
exactly.
on them.
Yeah.
So it's trouble.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier about break, and I know you're busy. I really appreciate the time. I just really do want to get in the weeds now that I have the number 2 world player in the world sitting in front of me. You said earlier, first you learn the 1,000 rules, but then a big challenge for the top players is you break all the rules. And I have seen this in your games. Like when I'm looking at openings and I see, oh, Hikaru has played this line, I pay attention. So for instance, and I'm really getting in the weeds, so listeners, I apologize. You could tune out if you want. The B4 King's Indian, the Bayonet King's Indian. Okay, for 30 years, people have been playing A5, but you went back to what would be kind of a classic line, Knight E8, which I think is brilliant because you're going for that F5, F4, and everybody has forgotten the reason why that's a bad move or maybe not as good as A5. So I've started playing Knight E8 because of you. Thank you very much. My highest rated wins ever are from that line. But do you try to kind of go back and clean up the old now that we have computers to look at these things?
I think that's actually the most exciting thing for me when I look at chess these days is that effectively anything is acceptable. Computers have basically shown you can play almost anything unless it is outright losing the game right away, and that actually makes chess very exciting because then you do start to think about all like rules maybe the wrong way, but you think about all these openings that you discarded in the past because they were just considered bad by what was modern theory at the time. So that is very true. Like I do that quite frequently. Or you look at some variation. If it's not losing, you play it. I played this thing against Fabiano in the candidates, for example, in the first round. It's something that probably, for the last 40 years, people were saying, you don't do this. I remember there was a time I was working with a strong grandmaster. I was like 11 years old. And he said, well, why didn't you push this pawn to E5? And he said, well, because white plays his bishop check. So for a long time, like it was considered just bad. But now because of computers and the strength, you can play that and it's completely acceptable. And it's not the only instance. There are many, many instances. So chess is very rich. And I think that's where, when we look at the future, it gives me a lot of hope for classical chess, for the slow form of chess, because when you have these kids playing the game where they've actually learned that way, that you can play almost anything, you can take these risks and still be fine as long as you know what you're doing, versus like the older generation where it's like try to be super fundamentally sound and play a certain way. If the young players keep playing that style, chess is going to continue to move forward. And it's going to remain a very, very exciting game versus all the players who play some of these boring systems like the Berlin defense, as an example. So with the kids learning this way, playing all these exciting openings versus the older generation where we kind of we play these fundamentally sound openings, as long as they keep playing the exciting way, these exciting opening strategies, chess is going to remain very exciting for a long time to come.
And yet, I look at these Norway chess games, though. I don't know for sure, but I think the only Sicilian was when Magnus attempted it against Prague and lost. And the commentators I was listening to said, oh, maybe Magnus is not going to try this risky style anymore against these kids. And then a lot of the games were just E4, E5, and Spanish or Italian. And maybe there's some fluctuation in there, like Magnus changing the move order slightly against Fabio. Fabiano wrote the course on the opening they played yesterday, and Magnus played a special move order, but it wasn't that huge of a risk.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's because the players in this event specifically, some of them were coming off the candidates tournament where they had done a lot of preparation for the event. And as I said, it's easier to be lazy. If you have certain opening strategies that you've looked at a lot recently, why do you want to go and try to learn something new? It's better to be lazy, or it's easier to be lazy, I should say. And then also, I mean, you have players who didn't have great ambitions. I mean, you had Ding Liren, for example, the current world champion, where his aspirations, I think, were simply to just perform. He wasn't looking to try and win games or do anything special. So I think the field definitely plays a huge role. And I think when you have more and more tournaments with the younger kids who are hungrier and more ambitious, you're going to see more exciting games.
And now you've won, an example of risky play. You've won so many exciting games against the world's top players, against world champion players with the King's Indian. But I don't really see people play King's Indian anymore in these top level tournaments.
Yeah, I think the reason people don't play the King's Indian is because it's a situation where you think about why do you play such an opening? And the reason you play the opening is you're hoping to get winning chances with the black pieces. Generally, it's very hard to win games with the black piece at the top level. So because of that, you're looking for something exciting. And the reason I think many people don't play it, including myself, is that because of computers, White can play almost any system and get a small advantage, and they don't have to go for the systems that are exciting. They can go for this 2-result situation where they play something very boring, where they have good chance to win, but if they mess it up, it's only going to be a draw. Whereas in some of the most exciting lines, White's either going to win the game or lose the game. You're looking at 2 results, but it's a White win or a Black win. And I think that's the main reason, is because there are just too many ways for White to get a small advantage and not play something that you're really hoping for, which is an exciting game of chess in the King's India.
I'm just trying to think of more of the specific. I just want to squeeze the chess knowledge out of you a little bit. Sure. Well, if you were starting to, a lot of your listeners, if you are just starting chess, how should people learn the rules of them and then learn to break the rules? Like, how do you really make the fastest strides in chess?
I think actually the 10,000 hours is definitely applicable in this case. I did a podcast with Malcolm a couple of years ago, and I think that just playing as much as you can, getting a basic opening strategy where you're not going to lose the game in, say, the first 4 to 10 moves. Once you have a basic opening strategy, just play as much as you can, whether you're a kid or even whether you're an adult. Because actually, I mean, that's the other great thing, is that you see some adults now who are actually trying this, where they just play for hours and hours and hours, and they get very, very good very quickly. Now, of course, very good is relative, but you get to, I would say, a reasonable amateur level without too much difficulty if you just keep playing. But it's very hard, because when you do poorly, it also takes a certain mindset to be able to keep pushing forward rather than just stopping after you have a bad day and you lose like 10 games in a row.
Yeah, like how do you get that bounce back mindset?
That I don't know. The mindset I can't speak to.
Because you've had it lately, and maybe you didn't have it in 2019.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just that, because ultimately when I think about the bigger picture, I just believe that good things are going to happen, or I know that everything's going to be okay, versus looking at it as like I'm worrying about everything and where things are going to go at the end of the day.
Like, do you feel your self-worth is not as tied to your rating?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it has anything to do with the rating. It's just the self-worth is tied to the income I make from the chess tournament. Like the rating matters so much as you get the invitation if you maintain or don't maintain it. But I think it's just that ultimately, like, it's how I do in the tournament is not going to change my life at the end of the day. It's not going to have an adverse or a positive effect either way, whether I win or I lose, because of everything else I've accomplished.
I wonder, like, so just in relative terms, like in the 90s, I hit about 2250. I played your brother at the Marshall Chess Club in the 90s. I remember you were there watching the game, and then as soon as the game was over, your brother won. And as soon as the game was over, you were like throwing the pieces all over the board, like, oh, you could have done this, you could have done this, you could have done this. You probably obviously don't remember, but I remember. And then I stopped playing right around then. And only recently I've started playing again, and it's like an immediate drop of 200 rating points. And then I just can't. I feel like I have knowledge, but I've lost some ability to win or to kill. And I don't know if it's an age thing or because I've done a lot of other things in my life, but I'm just not sure how to get back that killer mentality.
Well, I think there are a couple of things. I'm sure that you are lacking the killer mentality, but you are lacking that, and probably being older doesn't help. But I would actually say probably the biggest thing is that chess is just a very different game now. It's a lot tougher. I think the quality of the competition is much better across the board at all levels, just because of the amount of information out there. So I'd say it's a combination of many things, but I think probably, I mean, it's so tough though. It's so tough because you're at a level where you're pretty good, but there probably are a lot of really good. If you play online, there are probably a lot of really good players at that level. Who are aspiring. It wasn't that. Who are aspiring to get really good. They're trying to get better. Yeah, I'm not sure. I honestly, like, I don't like to be negative, but I think it's actually, the game is just different. It's very, very hard. And I see this a lot, like with my wife, for example, where she's a very strong chess player, about 2,300, similar level. And then she started teaching about like 6 or 7 years ago, and now she's trying to play again competitively. But she runs into all these kids who are super well prepared. Her 2 to 3 opening systems that she played her whole life, it's just not good enough. You have to play many different opening systems and strategies. So I think it's because the game is different. It's not even necessarily a you thing. I think it's probably just the game. It's a much harder game now, much harder at all levels.
Yeah, I feel that's true. I mean, I've been trying my best, and I've been studying. I study it every day and get coached and all sorts of things. But yeah, when I actually sit down for a game, I'll even get winning positions much more than I'll get losing positions out of the opening. But I just can't. Their kids are good at defending. Mm-hmm. They're good at the tactics. They move fast because they'll make any move that is just, they're very good at making pretty good moves.
Yeah,
but the whole game.
Yeah,
and I have to learn that. Like, I'm trying to make the perfect move if I run out of time.
Like, actually, I would say that's one thing. I worked with Garry Kasparov in 2011, and that's one of the biggest differences in modern day chess versus like when Kasparov or Karpov or these great champions of the past were playing, is that like the goal was to play the perfect move. You wanted to play the perfect move. And again, I think technology has changed things, because when you look at positions with computers now, there are a lot of positions where you might be a little bit worse, but it's very rare there's a situation where there's one move that's winning, unless it's a straightforward sequence of like, 10 moves calculation. When I think about like Kasparov, for example, he grew up with like, there's one best move. It's not where you have a computer telling you, well, you can play 3 moves and they're all almost equally good. It's like there's one move. There's a system to the whole thing, to the whole approach. And a lot of people, I think, who are from the older generation, people who like, I'm different because of course I've adapted, but I think if you played chess a lot in like the 90s or before computers became really strong, or even into the 2000s, this notion of wanting to play the perfect move is very common. Even my wife, she's the same way. She wants to play the perfect move, and I'm like, no, if there are 3 good moves, just pick one of the moves. Don't waste 20 minutes on this move. Pick one of the 3 good moves. I mean, the accumulation of good moves is going to be more important than trying to play like 2 perfect moves, because the 2 perfect moves are not going to win you the game.
That's a really good point. And I think that also is about patience too. It's just like you're not going to get rich quick on one stock. It's not necessarily the case that every move you have to win the game. Like it's just, there's a compounding effect to making these pretty good moves.
Yes, I agree with that. I mean, like, it's fairly abstract, but I would argue that's why when you see Magnus make blunders, more often than not, he makes blunders, and unless it's one of those howlers that loses the game, somehow he's still in the game after the blunder, because the accumulation of all the good moves, it balances out. It balances out versus the blunders. So definitely, I mean, being practical is something that players today are much more cognizant of, because you do look with computers, and the computer most of the time will just laugh and be like, okay, you can defend this way, that way, everything is fine. Whereas in the old school approach, it's it's not defensible. If you play the best move, you will win the game, but that's just not reality. And computers have shown us that chess it's very, very rich, and there's so many different possibilities.
Why did you stop working with Kasparov at the end of 2011?
Mainly because our styles didn't really fit that well, I would say. I mean, his approach was perhaps, I felt like a little bit dated on the one hand. He was too serious. He also took too much credit. He made certain decisions for me as well. And I mean, I'm not going to fault him for that. I mean, I understand who he is, his personality. But there were just a lot of little things that it didn't really work out the way that I was hoping to, because I felt like, Kasparov is too much of a dominant figure, and in some ways I was too deferential for obvious reasons to him. So yeah, it wasn't a good match. And I also think, when I look at just in general, whether it's chess or anything I do, like I'm somebody where I really believe that certain people have talents, and you can find ways to go about showcasing those talents, and they don't have to be the absolute top players. For example, the people that I work with in all the content creation, many of them are misfits. Some of those people, they're on depressants all the time. Like, some of them are smoking weed. Like they have issues in their life, but they're extremely good at what they do. And I think when I look at chess, the person that I work with mostly on chess, he's only about 2,300. He's not the strongest player. I mean, he can't play complete games of chess. He'll get winning positions, blunder and lose games just like you will. But what I need him for is for him to do the preparation where he can look at the opening strategies, get me to the position, and then I can take over and play. And if he can do that, he's done his job. And that is actually the most important thing, because ultimately it's on me to make the right decisions, when I'm in the game.
Do you feel he's gotten better working with you?
I mean, I think he understands me very well. I don't think it's something that anybody could do, certainly. But he is a better chess player now than he is at the start. I mean, I think at the start he's maybe like 2,000 when he started working with me, and now he's probably 2,300. But I also would say it's like if you look at business, for example, I think it's Bezos. He said something about what is the role of a CEO, and I think the role is basically make a couple of very big decisions. And when you put that in the context of chess, my goal is to make those big decisions in the games. Like if I can play 15 moves, that middle game strategy where there are 5-6 moves in a row, those are the critical decisions that are going to determine the outcome. So as long as I can do that, I've done my job. And other people can get me to that point, then they've done their job too. So you don't necessarily need the absolute best chess player in order to be successful.
Well, Hikaru, you mentioned your wife earlier. We've got to get you to her. Thank you so much for sitting down with me. I really appreciate it. It's been an interview I've been looking forward to for a long time. And congratulations again. I think Norway chess was it was outstanding, at least as a spectator, to watch you in action, and your success, the results from winning number 2, getting back to number 2 in the world, getting over 2,800 again for the first time, since 2015?
2015, yes.
Amazing. But
it's different, to add one more point to that about being 2,800. I remember when I got to 2,800 in 2015, and it was a big accomplishment, but then there's like, okay, what next? And at the time when I was thinking about it, it's just like, if I draw against people who are low rated, I lose ranking points. How am I going to maintain this ranking? It was more about like trying to maintain it. Whereas now when I have this rating, I don't really expect to keep the rating for forever, but I'm enjoying it. I'm not thinking about, oh, the dread of like, I have to maintain the rating to get the tournaments, or like, I have to stay number 2 in the world. I have to be ahead of certain players. I don't have any of those thoughts anymore. So I don't have the baggage or the burden that I once did. And so I think that's why in many ways I'm playing better than I ever did. So it's, I hope the listeners enjoy it, and I hope they find it fascinating.
And I think it's this healthy approach to all of these things, like in particular chess or streaming, the idea of not being attached to one artificial idea like rating or viewers or whatever actually contributes to success. It allows you to be your own player.
I keep going on, but one other thing I would say is very, very important.
You don't really want to have lunch with your wife. You want to. No, I'm just kidding.
But what I was just going to say, like, it's very important when it comes, to like live stream. A lot of people have this misconception about, the streamers aren't smart. They don't know what they're doing. But it is really important that you understand that the viewers who are watching it, like, they see you for who you are. I'm talking about like live stream, not YouTube videos so much. But they see you for who you are. And what I mean by that is that a lot of people who, if you go into it for the wrong reasons, you're not going to have success. So I think one of the reasons a lot of people in chess have not been successful, who've started in recent times, is because the reason that they go into it is the wrong reason. They're going into it hoping to make a lot of money because they see the success that I've had or others have had along the way. And I think the viewers are actually very smart and they see right through that. And so if you go into it with that approach versus just doing it because it's something to try out, something that's exciting, something you enjoy, is more of a passion, then you're not going to be successful. And when I started out, of course, I had none of these aspirations. I just thought it's something to do, it's something exciting, maybe share chess with a slightly broader audience. And then it became something much bigger. But I did not go in with the intention of it becoming my main job or how I would make a living.
I think you're absolutely right. Like, I did stand-up comedy for many years, and I owned a comedy club in New York, Stand Up New York on 78th and Broadway. And one thing I learned very quickly is that the audience is an X-ray machine. Like, if you're even the slightest bit nervous, they know it and they destroy you. And you always have to have the mindset that this is my party and you guys are just invited and I don't give a shit if you want to leave.
Yeah, no, it's very true. Because also sometimes when I'm in a very bad mood, the viewership is lower, and that's not by accident. It's because it's not an enjoyable atmosphere for them.
Yeah. Well, again, Hikaru, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And you're welcome back anytime. And when you start a chess AI company, let me know. I'll invest in it. So,
all right.
Thank you very much.
Sure, no problem.
All right, sir. Thank you.
Great.
Reese's peanut butter cups are the greatest, but let me play devil's advocate here. Let's see. So, no, that's a good thing. That's definitely not a problem. Reese's, you did it. You stumped this charming devil.
The most innovative companies are going further with T-Mobile for Business. Together with Delta, we're putting 5G into the hands of ground staff so they can better assist on-the-go travelers with real-time information. From the Delta Sky Club to the Jet Bridge, this is elevating customer experience. This is Delta with T-Mobile for Business. Take your business further at T-Mobile.com/now.